Well, welcome everyone. It is top of the hour at noon for our lunch and learn. If you're here, your lunch today is cookies and coffee. If you're not with us and you're out there virtually, it's whatever you have in front of you, I guess. But we thank you for joining us today. As you know, we do this monthly. We do a public education session. Many times I'm involved with it. We move it from month to month and change it based on the tax roll year and what we feel is relevant. We try and space them out. So far, I think we've had about 6 different sessions as far as the different content that we roll out, but they're always being updated. So even when they roll back around, there's new things put in, new slides. Obviously, tax laws are changing, things like that, new legislation. So we're constantly, updating our viewers on that. Today, we're also joined by Alex Luca, our in-house counsel. So he'll be dealing with some of the slides when I get in here. He'll jump in, deal with some common missteps. He deals with a lot of the details on deeds, and it gets a little sticky. We call it in the weeds with deeds because some of those things are can be a bit messy, and there can be a lot of missteps associated with those. So Alex will help get you guys square on that stuff. So. Excuse me. With that in mind, we'll get jump started here. We got Sandy at the controls back there too, helping out. So,
and can I note it's Purple Day?
It really is. I can't believe it. All of our attendees that have showed up today are all wearing purple, and they don't even know each other. And they didn't call each other.
We did call it. You guys don't know that.
Thanks for pointing that out, Sandy. We need to take a picture of all the right?
That's funny. So obviously this session is catering to real estate professionals, but anybody that's tuned in that, maybe just a homeowner too, you'll learn a lot from this. Hopefully you'll get some takeaways. But because we've got a bit of an educated group with realtors, title agents, attorneys, everybody in the real estate sector, we'll jump around pretty fast through a lot of this because you'll know a lot of the terminology. And then if you have questions at the end, or if you're in the room and you want to, chime in on something, Sandy will be monitoring the chat for questions as well. She knows what the slide deck's loaded with. So if she responds to you and says, Mike's going to get to that, that's coming up, or Alex is going to touch on that, just, sit tight and we'll get there and cover it. If we miss something, we'll have time at the end for questions. And hopefully we'll also have time to jump into the new website a little bit, give you, you haven't driven it yet, we encourage you to heavily. You can get there from, the normal site at pcpao.org. If you go to the top banner, that image can be clicked through, or the link at the top will take you over to .com. And that is running in parallel at present. And that is what will be our future web presence. So we encourage you to drive that. We have applied for the .gov domain, so we hope ultimately our website will live at pcpao.gov, but we're waiting for that approval. Excuse me. So January 1, I'm only going to touch on a couple things on this timeline real quick, because I think many of you know this, but January 1 is that critical date in our office. That's our effective date of value all the time. So whenever you see any values from our office, this is where we differ from the private sector in the fee world. The fee world, they're usually doing an as-is valuation as of a real-time effective date in most cases, unless they're doing a prospective value for new construction or a retrospective value for typically a litigation matter or some other purpose. But we in the ad valorem space as property appraisers, and what we do, it's January 1. So we're always looking at that. So our data is really in the past that we're looking at heavily. So when we set our values for January 1 of 2022, we're really looking at 2021 data is where the majority of the weight is falling. We're also looking at prior years to help with developing adjustments and things like that. But really that 2021 data is what's driving that 2022 number. So we're always basically behind. If we're in a rising market, we're always behind, which is part of that reason you're going to see a difference between our just value and true market value on the street. Other key dates, many of you are aware, March 1, that's your timely filing homestead exemption deadline. We do allow late files with an extenuating circumstance form that's available on our website. We do grant those all the way up until September 16th. So we try to give people as much runway as possible, but remember they've got to own and occupy prior to that January 1 in order to qualify. Trim notices, are delivered by our office in August. September, you have the taxing authorities holding their budget hearings. They finalize their millage rates, and then we extend the roll to the tax collector in October, and then they mail the bills out, and the property owners get those usually beginning of November. So the key values to look at, when you're dealing with outside appraisals, you're usually just looking at market value. That's the value you're dealing with. Well, you got 3 to deal with in our office. So when you look at our website, you'll see 3 different values. When you look at a trim notice, you'll see 3 different values, and that is just market value, assessed value, and taxable value. So those numbers get smaller as you go down towards taxable. So think about it as a funnel. You start, the biggest number is going to be your just market value. That's where we're tracking the market data. That's our developed value of just value. Then assessed value in the year after a purchase, assessed value and just value will be one and the same, because any Save Our Homes cap and any exemptions from the prior owner come off. Assessed value rises up to market value. So there's no cap at that point. So then that property owner can file for homestead, starts their new Save Our Homes cap, and then just value can start to deviate from assessed value. So that difference between those two is your Save Our Homes benefit or your cap differential, if you had a 10% cap. Then you go down to taxable value. The difference between assessed and taxable is exemptions. So that's where if you're 50,000 homestead, if you had some other personal exemption like a disability exemption, those types of things, a widower exemption, those all come off below the assessed value line. So then taxable value times the taxing authority's millage rates results in a tax bill. So let's look at values. As you all know, I'm sure we're heavily realtor today, in our not only in person but also online. I suspect that you've seen values rising quite rapidly. So we're going to give you a little value history. These are the values as developed by our office going all the way back to 2005. So you can see the last peak, the valley. Right now, don't look at this red line. That's new construction, which is tracked over on this right axis. So we're just looking on this left axis and these values here. So we've got just market value is depicted in blue. That's the aggregate of all market value in the county. You can see it goes up to $179 billion for 2022. And you can see taxable value is at about 110 billion. The difference between these two is a function of your assessment caps and your exemptions. That's what creates that difference. Now, new construction, you can see we broke $1 billion of new construction for 2022, up about 26% from the prior year, and we haven't broke $1 billion since back in the last run up. And then the breakdown of that $1 billion of taxable value, about 41% in residential, about 1/3 of it in multifamily rental apartments, and then the balance of 25% is your other general commercial uses. So that's where you're going to see your self-storages, your credit tenant retail, your industrial, all that stuff is falling in this bucket here. So we'll jump to the residential market. As we know, largely those values have been driven by residential activity, that rise on that value trend. So you can see here, we set a new record in number of single family sales, about 2,000 more than last year, which was already at a record number. Our median sale price for last year, and that's an aggregate for the entire year's worth of single family sales, was $345. The median's size has gone down slightly, and that's a function of people buying older housing stock. They're price point sensitive too, so that keep kind of squeezing down to a little bit smaller property, trying to get more bang for the buck. And you can see the price per square foot is up to $240 for last year, and that median sale price per square foot increase is equivalent to 21% year over year.
Wow.
And it has continued into 2022, but we are starting to see a slowdown of some of the sales. Obviously, it starts to happen as the interest rates rise, and we're looking at probably 2 more half percentage point increases here in the next couple months, and probably some more after that. These are the Realtor Stats. So this is from Pro, and the median sale price in this comparison, this was April, just for the sales in the month of April for 2022, median sale price was $440. So considerably more if you compared that to where we were last year. But this is really just 1 month's worth of data, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. Still, things are closing quite rapidly, and the month supply is still under a month. It is starting to creep up a little bit, and I think we'll see that continue. We've got rising, obviously, property insurance, big issue, flood insurance, another big issue, but property insurance homeowners insurance has been taking all the oxygen up, so you haven't seen a lot of attention on flood. You're going to start to hear more about it as people renew under the new NFIP risk rating 2.0. Once people crossed April 1, all existing NFIP policyholders, when they renew, they're going to start for the first time seeing the full actuarial rate that they're on their way towards. So that's going to get their attention. And when they see that, I think it's going to lead to a little bit more supply in the market, because I think you're going to see some people say, you know what, maybe I've had enough, and it's, time to move to South Carolina where my kids live, I'm going to go up there, and it's time to, sell and get out of Florida. So we'll see some of that, but there are plenty more people waiting in the wings to come into Florida. So someone will probably gladly fill their shoes and their home. So that's the obviously the supply has been the big thing that has really driven the price points, the fever, the competitiveness for the inventory that we do have. I show you this because I think this really paints the picture well when I bring demand on. So this is supply. You can see 10 years ago, we had almost 10,000 active listings. We're under 2,000 today. Now when we put demand on, that's historical demand. So you can see in relative terms, demand hasn't really changed that much compared to supply. And you can see the demand has eclipsed and covered up the amount of supply that we had, which has created that, that's why we have this anomaly of, $50,000 to $100,000 over ask, 15 contracts on a property, things, basically gone in a day or two. That paints the picture of why. So those are numbers I watch closely. I'm always looking at that active listing number to see if it starts to rear its head. The last recession we had, the Great Recession, that active listing number almost overnight just started to spike up. You could just see there were a lot of investors in the market then. A lot of new condos were being built. A lot of people were trying to flip those before they had to close them. And all of a sudden, we had a flood of listings, and those numbers started jumping up by thousands of listings very rapidly. And that was kind of when the music stopped. We're there in a different way this time. We've got a lot more cash buyers that have bought, over 30% of our single family buyers are using cash, and over 50% of the condo buyers are buying with cash. So a lot different than it was back in 07, 08-ish in that regard. However, at the same time, if you have really rapid value movement and people buy at those inflated numbers, they can still go upside down. They have, you can have equity today and have none tomorrow. So that's the fear. We just, have to watch that closely. But again, the pandemic has really been a big shakeup for the whole world, and obviously for our real estate market in particular. We've been really a winner on that side. Everybody wants to flow down here. Our biggest market in migration is from, and this is in the order, from New York, Illinois, and California are our three biggies. And California never really even used to crack our top 10. We probably had more people going from Florida to California than we did coming from California to Florida. So, that's a big difference for us. And I really don't see that mentality changing. People have kind of discovered Florida now. We're recalibrating our pricing because of, this wealth migration coming from these states that had greater buying power. They've been able to kind of reset some of our price points. Again, they don't always need an appraisal. They're paying cash, and then those appraisals that they paid cash for, they become comps. So, and when you start having enough of them, any one sale can be an anomaly, but when you have fistfuls of them, then they start to have an impact on the market. These are just the same thing, just blown up to 5-year instead of the 10-year. And Pinellas has, some extra reasons why, we'll continue to be, I think, a bit of an island compared to some other counties, because we're out of development land. So we're the development land. Yeah, if you haven't noticed. So we're the densest in the state by far of all the 67 counties. And, everything that you see going up is basically redevelopment. It's infill redevelopment. We've got a lot of underutilized property and parcels. So you're going to see a lot of creative solutions to make those parcels more effective within the county tax base, and for the residents and the businesses of Pinellas County. So you can see on this slide, it just kind of paints the picture. You can see this is all the housing stock, and you can see now, we basically don't build anything here. We just don't, even with all the building that you see going on and the $1 billion of new construction, we're really not adding that much as far as housing units. It's under 1,500 units of fee simple housing a year on average. And then you'll see on the next slide, well, not the next one, but yeah, well, I'll jump to that one. So this would be multifamily. So multifamily, we're adding under 2,000 units a year. Even though you've seen apartments going up everywhere, when you aggregate that and add them all up, it's still under 2,000 units each year, which you go into some other counties and they're adding far more than we are. And again, it's just because we're constrained with land, and they're noticeable to us because they're usually on the major corridors that we're driving around on. So they pop right out at you. But we're up over 90,000 units of multifamily rental housing stock at this point. All right, so touch base on Save Our Homes. I know you guys have run into this, cap resets, obviously, especially for people coming from out of state, not familiar with Florida tax law. It's a big reason why we try to do these education sessions all the time, put a lot of resources on our website. You'll have somebody, they'll start the tax shop. Even when they look at MLS sheets and they see taxes, they'll start to say, well, they'll tell the realtor, oh, show me this house because the taxes are lower on it. Like, don't even look at that. It means nothing. And I've been lobbying to get that taken off of the MLS sheets because it really is deceptive, that it's even on there. because that's the seller's taxes has nothing to do with where the new buyer is going to be. So I know you guys get that, but so you can have two similar houses, very different situation. This example here on this slide, it's more than 4 times. And we've seen them as high as 7 times with the market the way it's going right now. It's just insane. Just to give you some perspective, excuse me, on homesteaders versus non-homesteaders. So we're at about 64% of our property owners in the residential arena are homesteaded, and 36% are non-homesteaded. And people ask this a lot. They, say they hear a lot about investor buyers and, is our percentage of homestead eroding, or is non-homestead growing a lot? So it's moved 1% in the last year. It had been growing. The homesteaders were actually growing, and they receded by 1% from 2020 to 2021, which was really only a couple thousand. It wasn't a big number. Yes, sir.
Quick question on this. When you talk about the homestead versus non-homestead residential, are you talking only about the single family homes, or are you also including condos?
Yes.
And you including condos, each condo is a separate unit?
Correct. Yeah, and that's a great point. When you have a condominium, each individual unit's considered a parcel. So we value parcels of real estate. Now, if it's an apartment complex with 300 units, that could be one parcel, but it has 300 units because it's all under one ownership. It's one commercial entity that owns the whole project.
But for homestead, you would consider it to be 3.
Well, you can't homestead an apartment, a rental apartment.
There's a difference between condo and apartment.
Oh,
You have to own it.
Apartment, you don't own it.
no, sorry.
That's what he's
I thought it was condos.
This is my condo.
Right. Yeah.
I'm new, I'm under a good age.
So in the early 90s, the voters, via constitutional amendment that was actually originally brought forward and spearheaded by the Lee County property appraiser, because he saw what was going on in the market. He saw Floridians in danger of getting priced out of their homes. Again, it was a lot of northern buyers were coming in, buying a real estate, a lot of more cash buyers. They were starting to spike the values. And he was concerned that people were going to get driven out of their homes if you're simply just following the market, because there was no cap at that point in time. You just followed the market. So if it was going to be, if you had 20% growth, you literally could go up 20%. So he came up with this idea of Save Our Homes, and that created a cap on your assessed value. So once you've established homestead, then that becomes your cap year, and in the next year your assessed value cannot go up more than 3% or CPI, the Consumer Price Index, whichever is less. And in most years that has been less. As you can see, just in the last 12 or going back to 2010, you can see it only hit the 3% cap one time in 2012. And it only hit it less than a handful of times going back into the 90s. So the cap over here, you can see this past year, 7% was CPI. So we're obviously hitting the cap for 2022, and CPI this year to date is a large number as well. So I do not foresee not hitting the cap again for 2023.
You see that changing at all in the next 5 years?
That's driven by national policies, as we are seeing, it shake out right now. So we have to wait and see. It depends on a lot of decisions that are macroeconomic. That's really what drives that CPI.
Two questions.
Here, just market value as it rises in this example, and you can see assessed value is being constrained, in this case at the max of 3%, starts to create that differential between those two numbers. So that's basically how Save Our Homes cap benefits you over time. So that differential right there is your Save Our Homes benefit. All right, now this next slide will make your head hurt. There's a lot going on, but It is a great slide because what it shows you is, and we'll use the Great Recession as an example. Think about this, the Great Recession as this spike of value going up. Those homeowners were still protected by the Save Our Homes cap as this differential was growing. Falling, your assessed value can actually still continue to rise. So our office obviously got lots of calls about why is my assessed value still rising? Why is my tax bill rising? And it was because of this recapture rule. So it's designed to continue to move upward until assessed value meets just value. So you can see here, assessed value can never be more than just value. So once those two meet, then they can ride down together. And then in this case, it established a new bottom, and then the market turned back up, and then you started building a new differential.
Sorry, me again.
Mm-hmm. And then, as most of you probably know, if you don't benefit from the Save Our Homes cap, if you're not homesteaded, then whatever the other property is, it's protected by the 10% non-homestead cap. So that protects you, that holds the assessed value on all millages except for schools to 10%. Schools are not capped by the 10% cap. So that piece of taxation can still go above the 10%. Well, they've got a lot of taxable value to work with this year. It's, you know, around 15%. So it's a strong number. So portability. This is one that confuses a lot of people and one we should probably touch on. So again, we've talked about that differential that is generated between the just market value and the assessed value. That difference between those two numbers is what creates your port amount. So that is what you can carry from one homestead, one Florida homestead, to another Florida homestead. Works statewide, all 67 counties. We communicate with the other counties if somebody's porting in or out, and work with them on getting the right calculations for that. That is based on our numbers, on our values, not on what they necessarily sold the property for. So it's really between the just value and the assessed value. That's the difference you want to look at. And when you're estimating that difference, you can carry up to $500,000 of benefit from one property to the next. That's the maximum. And you can do that in a lateral move or an upsize. So if you're going from a just value of 250 to a just value of 500 and you had $100,000 of port, you can carry the full amount. If you're going the other way in a downsize and you're going from 500,000, let me do it this way because on camera it's going to look backwards. 500,000 down to 250 and you had 100,000 of port, well, it's going to get prorated downward. So basically you're going down in half. So you're going to lose half of that port amount. You're going to be at 50,000 that you can port. If you didn't do that, then you basically could have people downsize and be tax-free because they could wipe out their whole taxable value. Yes, sir.
Is there a window of time when you can transport one homestead to the other?
Yes, it's 3 tax years. I'll show you right here. So
It's on this sheet, right here.
yes, it is. Yeah, so now you have 3 years. That was a legislative change that we were fortunate to champion and be successful in 2020. And that passed with, I believe it was 75% of the vote. And we added an additional year so that property owners would not get caught off guard. A lot of people were losing out their ability to port from one property to the next, because when it was 2 years, it could actually be as short as a year and a day. Because if you look at this graphic here, the only time you really get the 3 now, which, you know, we increased it by a year, the only time you get 3 is if you sell it at the beginning of the year. As you move around the time circle here, if I sell at the end of the year, I've already burned my first tax year. So again, it's that January 1 magic date. So that's the important thing. So we wanted to restore, we thought it was important to restore, at worst case, a 2-year window for people to move from one property to the next. Because whether they're building, you got construction issues, delays, contractors, misses their deliveries. And then on top of that, you've got people that go through different financial situations or need to move them with parents for a short period of time, or other family members or whatever. They might need to rent, and they still would like to have that little bit of window to get that benefit if they buy back in and are able to homestead within that window.
Okay. I don't see anywhere on.
All right, so actually we talked about Amendment 5, which was the increase of portability in 2020. So I thank you guys if you supported that. As realtors, I would assume you probably did. If you're, another thing that kicked in 2020, you may run into this from time to time. If you're working with a veteran that has total and permanent disability exemption, so they're basically 100% tax exempt. If they're in that case and they already have a homestead and they decide they want to buy a new home from y'all, and you help them with that transaction, in the past, they would always have to pay their proration of taxes for that closing year. And they were never really happy about it because they were used to being exempt. Well, this now allows them in the year after, so they do have that year of closing, they have to pay their portion of that year's taxes on that new transaction. But then in the next year, as long as they file for homestead on that new property, then they can apply and receive a rebate from the tax collector for what they paid the year prior.
I've got this one right now, going on the same thing. Now, my understanding is when I looked at her taxes, holy mackerel, nothing almost, but it's school taxes, is that what she's actually paying? Her husband was totally disabled. So that's really all she paid is like school taxes.
Be a non-ad too.
What?
Yeah, there could be a non-ad valorem, because non-ads are not exempt.
Okay,
So
she's
not
gonna pay taxes
on the non-ad. So a non-ad valorem is not according to value. That's a flat
right.
fee typically. They repaved your roads and they tack it onto your tax bill.
Here's the thing here, and then she's gonna move to the new place like right away, so she just needs to file for tax at homestead at the new place. Will she get some kind of money back or something? She's her husband's the disabled.
He's
but he's not-
TMP. He's not what?
He's now passed away.
Okay, so she has surviving spouse.
Yes.
Yes.
I just want to make sure she doesn't lose money, so.
Right.
She's gonna get some kind of money back.
In the year after she purchases. So she has to file for homestead on the new one. And then she can apply for that rebate from the tax collector.
Okay, rebate. All right.
Yes. Yep. And then we have another exemption, been around for a while, but it's a local option exemption. You should be aware of it. It only applies at present in 3 cities, and it's a long-term low income senior residency exemption. So City of St. Pete just adopted it for the first time a year ago. And it does have a lot of high hurdles that the property owner has to clear, and one of them has to be at least 65 or older, been in the property as a homesteaded residence for 25 years or more. And the biggest hurdle these days is the fact that the just value has to be less than $250,000, which that is a problem. So that's something that I'm going to work with our property appraisers associations to try and get that rectified in the legislature next year and get that number moved upward. It really needs to move upward, and then probably have an escalator put on it so we don't have to keep going back and touching it. But obviously we know that that's a tough number to meet, even for our low income seniors.
Is there a question about increasing the income level? There's an income cap.
Yes, yeah.
What's the income cap?
It's around $32,000. And it escalates. It does move each year, but there's really been no discussion about that number moving at this point.
And generally with that number, a lot of things are not included in that, like your social security income is not gonna be included in that
Right.
number. There's a variety of things that are not included in it. I don't have the exception list on hand, but there are a lot of things that aren't included.
I'm going to start jumping around a little faster so I can get Alex up here in a minute. One other thing to be aware of, the widowers exemption, we were successful getting that increased this past session. It won't kick in until 2023, but that number will be moving from $500 of assessed value, which equates to about $10 in taxes a year, to $5,000, which is about $100. So a lot better than where it was. Still not a huge number, but certainly something that can help those property owners. And then we've got something on the ballot. This is another item that we championed. It will be Amendment 1 on the November ballot. And I brought this to the legislature, and we were very successful getting this approved in the 2021 session, but it requires a constitutional amendment. And it's related to going back to flood issues, properties in the special flood hazard areas. So, and here's the implementing bill that really explains it better. But what I wanted to do was be proactive about incentivizing people to make private investment in elevating their homes rather than having to rely on FEMA grants and other loan programs and things like that to try and get out of harm's way. It does a multitude of things. It helps us from our mitigation standpoint. Obviously, it gets assets up off the ground, out of harm's way, preserves the tax base, keeps people in their homes, actually adds a lot more life to the homes because you can elevate an existing home or you can knock it down and rebuild. And we're not going to hit you as new construction. So you don't get this cap reset. You get to keep your assessed value where it was, up to 110% of your original square footage. You go over that, and then that starts to trigger as new construction. So that 110 was already in existing statutes related to calamities. So if your property was wiped out due to some calamity event, you are allowed to rebuild to that 110 and keep the same treatment. You don't get treated as new construction. But I said, why can't we do that proactively rather than have to wait for people to get washed away or blown away? So that was well received by the legislature, and that will be on the ballot in November. So hopefully you guys will be able to support that. Yes.
Any thought about getting incentives for storm windows and all that stuff? Making sure your roof stays on and all that?
That stuff already exists, actually. So
They just passed something like that.
July 1, it starts.
Okay.
well, yeah, the July 1, that's a sales tax abatement essentially for putting in storm windows. And like she said, that starts July 1, and I think it goes for a year and a half or 2 years. 2 years. But then already, if people make storm improvements to their home, shutters, hurricane windows, that type of thing, that is not considered in our assessed value. It's in the just market value, but it's not in the assessed value. So they're already getting the benefit of that. All right, and then the other amendment is going to be on the ballot. It's another $50,000 for critical service workers that was put on the ballot by the legislature this past session. So that will be your classroom teachers, K through 12, law enforcement, correctional officers, firefighters, EMS, child welfare professionals, and obviously your armed forces and National Guard members. So watch for that one as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to Alex. I know we're running long, but I want him to jump into some of these common missteps. Mr. Alex Luca. I'm going to turn this off.
What's your last name?
Luca, LEC. Yeah.
Okay, you're good.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'll try and breeze through this. I know we're getting real short on time, and Mike wants to get into the website. But we're going to get into to some of the missteps that people run into with homestead and with deeds as they go through. So the big one is, as we've been saying, is the assessment date is January 1. What this also means is to qualify for exemptions, you also need to qualify as of January 1, which means your deed needs to be recorded, needs to be signed prior to January 1st if you want homestead for that tax year. Another one, a big one, is a married couple is only eligible for one exemption. So if, people that get married later in life, they each have their own homes that have been established. Well, once you get married, you have to give up one of those homestead exemptions, which also means one of those Save Our Homes caps is going. Now, the greater of the two caps is the one that survives when you get married. So if you decide we want to live in one house and bring the cap over, you can, but the greater cap applies. You don't get to stack them together.
That January 1, you said.
Yes.
Said on it, you're gonna get to carry that one that's already on the house you buy, and then go to the January 1 for the new.
Well, okay, so if you get two people, they each have their own homesteads and they get married, one of the.
Married, one before that, just saying.
Okay.
So like I buy a house.
Yes.
And it has homestead on it.
Okay.
I can use that homestead.
Yes, you can keep it to the end of the year and then get your own homestead and then transfer over if you had another home. Yeah. Yes. So we'll quickly get into the cap reset issues. This has been a big one recently as more and more people either estate plan or they want to limit their liability and start renting a property. They'll put it into an LLC or move it out of an LLC. Well, this triggers a reset of your non-homestead cap. Putting a property into an LLC, even if you own it 100%, it's still its own entity. It's one step removed from you because, it limits your liability. You don't directly own the property anymore. So it will reset that 10% cap. And it's a big issue with this market rising that happens as people start to do that. We've been getting more and more calls on that. What we do, if there is a transaction or a transfer into an LLC or out of an LLC that results in a pretty big cap loss, we've been mailing courtesy letters to people that allow them to contact our office. And what we will do is if the property is reverted back to the same ownership before the next January 1, we won't reset that cap.
So essentially you lose the homestead when you transfer it to an
Well, an LLC can't claim homestead at all. So it would go anyways. But what we're saying is that 10% non-homestead cap. If property gets transferred into an LLC, it resets that 10% cap as well. So that's the greater issue. And we run into that. We've been running into it for a while. As the market's been going up, we've been seeing it more and more. I mean, the 10% cap really wasn't even much of a thing for a while because the market just wasn't going up enough. Now it is. And so people are realizing those when, they're losing $30,000-$40,000 in 10% cap just because they're putting property in an LLC to protect their liability as they rent it. So for portability, we're not using the sale price. It's the difference between the just and assessed value as of January 1st. A lot of people will say, well, I sold my property for this amount. Well, you got to remember, we're using last year's sales. So, we're a year behind. So even though you might have sold your property for way more than we have you assessed, that's just not the way it works because we're using the last year's numbers. So, and then as Mike already touched base on the other one, the upsize versus the downsizing, it's proportionate. If you're upsizing or lateral moving, you're going to get the entire amount of your port. If you're downsizing, it's, based off of that amount, proportion to it. So we're going to get into homestead removals here. So you can request to have your homestead removed at any time. This is something that comes into effect primarily. I think we have a thing in here. Oh, I guess we took out the sneaky seller guide. So this is something as real estate professionals that you got to watch out for. So when you have a seller who owns another home, what they can do is they can go ahead and homestead that home when they're selling the one to your buyer. The bigger issue is if the buyer is relying on keeping that homestead for the year, and the seller doesn't tell you that they've already or are going to move that homestead over to another property, all of a sudden the buyer's on the hook for a huge tax bill. How our office sort of combats this, because we're limited in what we can do, is if the property, the seller tries to move the homestead after March 1st, which is the filing deadline, we'll just flat out deny it.
As long as it's in Pinellas.
As long as it's in Pinellas. If they're living somewhere else, we have no control over that. But as long as they're in Pinellas, if it's after March 1st, we flat out deny it. However, we have no control if they're out of county. So this is something to really consider with your buyers, and talk to the sellers too, see if they're moving somewhere else, if they're going to take the homestead, so the buyer's not relying on that lower tax number.
Yeah, I try just to really reinforce understanding your seller's intentions. You know, if they already own 2 properties and they can strip that homestead off and move it to the other one, then your new buyer could get a big surprise.
But I was under the impression that you cannot transfer the homestead from the seller to the buyer at all. The buyer.
No, you can't.
You cannot, right?
You cannot.
So what happens is the buyer is benefiting from the seller's homestead for the year, because you know that January 1st assessment date. So say seller sold the property on January 2nd. Well, the buyer would still enjoy the seller's homestead for the rest of the year.
But the buyer's homestead starts the following January 1.
The buyer's does.
And you know, if he lives in the homestead,
Right,
right?
but he's paying taxes based off of the seller's homestead staying on the property for the rest of the year. The issue we're running into is where seller already has another home, and buyers are relying on keeping seller's homestead for the year, but seller had already pulled it off and taken it to his other home. Like,
Yeah, and there are some counties that even allow to do that late. So that's when it's really a problem, is if they let the homestead strip off the property that the buyer bought late, because then all of a sudden, boom, the cap resets in that acquisition year rather than waiting.
so now we're going to get into some deed missteps. These we'll go through a little quicker because that's just mainly for title companies, but it's still something to consider. So identifying the person, when you're putting something on a deed, we want to know if, especially for trusts, it needs to have the trust name and the trustee. So if it just has the trust, we don't know who the trustee is. We don't know who can act on behalf of the trust to deal with the property. You're going to get a friendly letter from us saying you forgot the trustee. If it just has the trustee and no trust name, well, that's a little bit bigger of a problem, because now it's owned by the trustee individually. Because it doesn't name a trust, the trustee is assumed to own it individually. And it happens sometimes where they forget to copy and paste the trust name in there. And it'll require a whole new instrument executed and a lot more work to fix it. Tenancy is a big issue we run into, especially with joint tenants, the rights to survivorship. It must clearly say there are survivorship rights. We cannot imply it. It has to say that they are joint tenants with rights to survivorship for there to be survivorship rights. If it doesn't, then the presumed tenancy, if there's 2 or more people, is tenants in common. And if it's tenants in common, each person is entitled to a homestead proportionate to their ownership interests. So if you meant to say survivorship rights and you didn't, and now you're trying to homestead it, well, there's 2 people, you're only entitled to 50% of your homestead if it's just one of them claiming it. If you have 3, 33%. If it's joint tenants with rights to survivorship, each person is entitled to 100% homestead on the property. So, and then these are some of the ones where we get some weird deeds coming through. A lot of the DIY ones where you get 100th percentage, or whatever this was, a millionth percentage on a property. We have to do this. When you see these, but we have to update them based on whatever percentage of ownership it is, and we'll put it in our system. But it is something to look out for. If the title company makes a mistake, make sure to review your deeds before they go in. So after the fact, this is another big issue we run into. So there's only so much you can correct before you have to execute an entirely new deed. So the things that a corrective instrument can correct, which means that it's actually going back and fixing the original deed and using the original deed's date, are legal description errors, excuse me, and name misspellings or omissions of like a parcel number. So only real basic things can be corrected. Tenancy cannot be corrected. So if you mess up the tenancy and mess up the homestead, well, you're kind of out of luck because you can't retroactively fix it. It has to be going forward. If it's a misspelling or a legal description, that you can go backwards and fix. So it's really important to make sure that you have that tenancy right the first time, because it can mess with the homestead exemption and mess with the Save Our Homes cap and portability going forward, all because, you know, someone forgot to proofread it. And then these are, you know, and some examples of amendments to deeds. Well, you can't really do that unless you fully re-execute it. I think this one was, yeah, they hand wrote the legal description in, didn't have new signatures or anything, and just tried to and the clerk will accept it. If you look up there, you can see where the clerk accepted it and recorded it, but our office won't update based on that. You can't just re-record something without getting new signatures or anything like that. There's some crazy stuff that comes through here, but that's one of them. LCE and submerged land. LCEs are not insurable by title companies. The biggest issue we see here is one deed will say it includes the garage, and then the next deed won't have the garage, and then the next deed will have the garage, but we're following the chain of title. So we assume that somewhere in the middle it got assigned. And so this can create some huge chain of title issues with garages or submerged land or really any other type of limited common element when they're left out or brought back. What we do is we rely on the most recently recorded deed. So if it gets left out once, we assume that the prior owner did something with it. Unless, we get a condo doc or something that says specifically that they're assigned to the units. And we usually will have our people send out and reach out to these, to at least the condos, trying to figure out where they are, who owns what, to assess them, because limited common elements do need to be assessed to a parcel. Out-of-state probate. Foreign wills are not good enough unless they're admitted to probate, and the probate court issues letters or says there's a personal representative who can then pull the property out of the estate. That's the biggest thing we get, is someone will just bring a will and a death certificate and say, okay, this is who owns the property. Well, not really. It still has to go through probate. There still needs to be either an order determining homestead or some type of distribution. Things don't just automatically come out of an estate after someone dies, unless there is that survivorship right, or a life estate, or one of the ladybird deeds, something along those lines. Things don't automatically come out of an estate unless it's specifically on the deed, or it's held in a trust or some other alternative form of ownership. And we'll get into the tax estimator, and I think we're going to bring Mike back up. I hope I ran pretty long, but.
That's all right.
This is so informative.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Alex. No, Alex does a great job for us. Most of you have probably driven the tax estimator, so I'm not going to go through that right now. We're basically up against the 1 hour mark. I know some people may have to go. We'll keep going. And this will be recorded, so you can check back in on our YouTube channel and pick it up. But we've still got some people here in the room, and probably some that can hang online if they want. And we'll jump into a few other things and do some Q&A. But obviously, the tax estimator is on both the old website and has been added to the new website. If If you haven't used it, it does get over 11,000 runs a month, so it is very active. So it's a great tool for when your buyers are shopping around and want to know what a good realistic expectation of what their taxes are going to look like in the year after their acquisition, once, you know, they're not benefiting from the seller's exemption and caps, that it's a good way to know. And it also deals with portability. So that's a nice thing too, is it automatically deals with that. You just plug in the couple of questions that it asks you, the answers, and you'll get a nice result. So the new website, how many here in the room have driven the new site?
Oh, yeah.
Great, great. So this is what the new site looks like now. If you haven't been to it, there have been some people that haven't noticed that the new site even exists, because you have to go to the top of the old site, click through the banner, or click the link at the top. We're going to try and make that more prominent, do some things to gain more and more adoption before we start the countdown clock to retire the old site. But I assure you, you can do everything in the new site you can do in the old site. We tried not to move the cheese too much on you, but we tried to make it very intuitive from a usability standpoint, so that you really don't need help documentation to be able to find things. And, you know, right here, you've got speed buttons on the left side. The search is front and center. So you can pick whether you want to search by address, owner, parcel ID, subcondo, all that, without having to go into a drop down. You can use the drop downs as well, obviously. But right here, your quick search, your map search will jump you to the big map. You've got to know our book and page search. So if you literally wanted to search and see if a deed has come through the clerk and is now been QC'd in our data, that's where you would search for it. That does not search the clerk's records. That's searching our records that have already come through the clerk. So it's a little bit different. If you want the actual clerk search, which they're going to have the deeds before we get them. There's usually at least a 2-week lag between when they do them and then when we are able to get them through our system.
Question, what is your lag time on a transfer?
It's generally 2 weeks if there's no hair on it. So if there's issues or, you know, some of those deed issues that Alex brought up, then we're not going to change ownership. We're going to reach out to the parties involved and try and get it rectified.
Talk about 2 locations found properties that changed hands that didn't get recorded for a long time.
Well, some of that, whether they record it, that's a whole nother matter.
Say, you didn't pick it up.
Okay.
Whether they record it.
Okay. The odds are there was some issue with it where we had to get a hold of the buyer or the seller. Yeah. Because normally if there's no glitches in the legal description, the witnesses are, you know, are appropriate, all that type of stuff, it usually goes through pretty quick. Now, there are times of year where we can back up to, obviously, you know, right around year end, you know, there's different pushes and sometimes the clerk gets backed up. So they'll get backed up. And if they get backed up, they could get backed up a couple weeks. Then they jailbreak and dump a bunch of deeds on us, and that pushes us behind. So.
Now, if we wanted to, because you said it doesn't have going straight to the clerk, where would we go if we needed to get something more quickly and it wasn't on your site yet?
Yeah, go straight to the clerk site. And we have the link in that search. So if you drop that search down, you'll see the link to the clerk site.
Oh, right.
So you can go and search there directly. And then we've added this new feature here, this My Location. So if you're on a web-enabled or location-enabled device, you know, your cell phone or a tablet, you touch that, it's going to pull up the parcel nearest to where you're standing. So if you walked up for a listing presentation and you're in their driveway and you hit that button, it's going to grab the parcel.
Which one did I click on?
The one that says My Location.
Ah,
Do you also have an app?
It's not an app, but it works very app-like. So it's a very responsive page. It's actually more robust than an app because an app is pretty streamlined on what you know, they're very focused. So we tried to make it where it was actually more responsive.
But this is 100% mobile.
Yeah, just go to
Absolutely.
Chrome and then go to their site and then your gift.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have on your site somewhere where you can sign up to have protection for fraud alerts possibly? That what's been going on if people's property have been,
Funny you should ask.
huh?
Funny you should ask.
So again, not on our site. We have a link to it in our How Do I? Is that where it is? Sandy is in How Do I?
Let's call it.
But well, we have a drop down section called How Do I, and it has how do I do all these things, but it actually sits at the clerk's site. So it's a service offered again by the clerk because it's related to deeds and official records. And
Completely free.
yeah, it's completely free, which is great because you've probably heard on the radio or seen ads on TV about you can sign up for this deed fraud alerts, home title lock or whatever the different ones, and they're a pay service. This one, the clerk offers for free. So put your name in, put your email address in, whenever something goes through official records, and it doesn't have to just be a deed. It can be a notice of commencement, it can be a satisfaction of mortgage. So anything that gets recorded in official records, you'll get that email with a link to that OR booking page so you can check it out to see is that really you? Is that legit or not? We've had more and more people taking advantage of our seniors, particularly the ones that have a lot of equity in their property. Those are the ones most vulnerable to have some deed fraud type event happen. So it's a great extra additional service you can provide your clients. It's a great additional touch point to reach out to ones you've already worked with in the past.
I think I've seen it listed on the Lee County property prices.
Yeah, they
on
may.
their website.
They may have it, and we've promoted it many times. But I mean, I include it in my presentations, and we've done social media posts on it. We do have a link to it. We don't have a special button for it, but the resources we talked about that's that one pager for buyers and sellers. And we have all of our brochures. You saw the people that are here, you saw the brochure rack when you walk in. All those brochures are online as well. So if you need to get those to any of your clients, you can do so. We've got additional resources. We now publish 3 different newsletters. The homeowners and the real estate professionals one, we pretty much do on a monthly basis. The business owner one is usually we'll skip a month here or there because it's very focused. We want to keep them nice and short and concise. So if you want to sign up for any of those, we try to really target those to those particular groups and make the information very relevant to the time of year and what's happening at that particular time. We do have a Facebook page, so you can follow us there. We always have timely stuff there. This is National Homeowners Month, as proclaimed by the Realtors. But I thought every month was National Homeowners as declared by the Realtors, but they had to pick a month, so June was the month. So we actually have a campaign on our social media site right now going, and we're doing dripping posts out there related to home buyer resources and things like down payment assistance and low cost loans and different things to help people out, homeowners guides, that type of stuff. So we're dripping those resources out. So encourage people to follow our Facebook page and stay up with us there. And then we also have our YouTube channel. So there you can subscribe to that. You can get these lunch and learn sessions from each month as we record and publish those, as well as other help tips. You'll find some, the new website tutorial is out there. We did that last month. The whole session was dedicated to diving into the website and driving it in real time. So I encourage you to check that one out. It goes through all the basic maneuvers. We'll be doing an advanced one coming up where I'll dig into some of the deeper dive features related to the website. And there's the slate of public education series sessions that we've done so far. Again, these rotate around. So next month will be first time Florida homeowners again. We've done that one a couple of times. We keep updating that one. And we call it first time Florida homeowners just because we're trying to get the attention of the people that have come from out of state, because it's really important that they understand Florida tax law. But it really applies to all Florida homeowners. You know, any Florida homeowner is going to learn something in those sessions. It's obviously going to deal with Save Our Homes, portability, all these things that they really need to understand in the cap resets. And we'll be adding to that slate of classes as things are relevant. If you have suggestions, I think we even handed out some suggestion slips. And if you've got some things you feel like we should cover, let us know. We'll work it in. And with that, we'll move to questions. I know Peter's got a question.
You know, you answered mine.
Kind of question, I think. I have a situation that I really would love to be able to share with you. Are you available to make 5 minutes after this second?
Sure.
Perfect.
Okay. We got any questions on the outside?
No, we have a very quiet audience on the outside, no chats.
We must have answered everything then. All right. Well, great. Well, thanks for being with us. Sorry we ran a little bit long. Not too bad, but we try to obviously we appreciate everyone's time and try to stay concise on these. But you never know where the Q&A stuff's going to go, and sometimes we deviate from the path a little bit. So that's what makes these great, though. Every time you come to one or listen to one, they're always a little bit different because we go down a little bit different trail, or different questions and answers will bubble to the top. And things are always changing in the realm of Florida property tax law and exemptions. So consider our office a resource. Reach out anytime. Our average on hold time is about 9 seconds. So I think we outperform some other agencies in that regard. So we're happy. We're proud of that. We got a great staff that, in 4 different locations around the county to serve our citizens. And we're trying to obviously do this balance of provide online resources and in-person customer service on a daily basis. So anything we can do for y'all, please reach out. We work very well with the realtors on a daily basis. And in fact, when am I going to be speaking at Pro?
I do believe that is
July?
July.
Okay. Yeah, I think late July, I think we'll be doing a session at Pro. So again, that will be probably mostly digging into the website and going through a lot of deep dive there to help them out. All right. Well, without any further questions, those of you that are here, make sure you eat all the cookies and whatever